Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. And today we are joined by Dr. Chase Spears, a combat veteran and retired U.S. Army public affairs officer with 20 years of service, including a deployment to Afghanistan. Now pursuing a doctorate at Kansas State University, Chase is a scholar, writer, and advocate on ethical issues in the military, from COVID and transgender policies all the way to how the American military has been used as a weapon against its own people. Chase, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be with you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
So why don't you give us a brief overview of your career in the military and what led to you walking away from it?
No, thanks so much. This was kind of an unexpected story. If you would have known me as a kid, you would have said, that dude is never going in the Army. If you look at my brother, he always looked like a Marine. So when I told my family, hey, I think I'm joining the Army, there were a lot of jaws hitting the floor unexpectedly. I was always kind of a fat kid. But I always studied journalism, and I wanted to be in television and news radio production. Of course, this is long before we ever knew podcasting would be a thing. But I grew up so passionate about news, so passionate about media as kind of the fourth state of accountability over the government. I really loved investigative reporting. This was something that I followed as a kid, and I was like, I want to be like that guy or that gal who really kind of helps to hold people accountable to what they know the right thing is, but they're not doing anyways because it's easier not to. And so I pursued an undergraduate in television and radio broadcasting, and I graduated into about the worst possible economy one could for getting a new job in news and journalism. This was 2001. And down here in the States, we had this thing called the Telecommunication Act of 1996, which deregulated media, which meant that a sizable percentage of the jobs in news were going away because there was tremendous consolidation. It went from where one owner was restricted to they could only own so many stations and so many markets. Now, it was a Wild West. You could, whatever you could afford, you could buy. And so the economy I graduated into, I couldn't even get unpaid internships because there was just such a long line of people trying to get in.
Wow.
And I thought, well, how can I set myself apart? I know I'll get a master's in journalism. So my wife and I moved up the road to Knoxville to the University of Tennessee, and I got a master's. I was working on a master's in journalism. And again, I kept hearing the same thing, like, oh, your grades are impressive, your coursework is impressive, you're impressive, but we're looking for people with 10 plus years of experience to come in. And I'm like, well, I am 22, dude. I don't have 10 plus years of experience. And so I thought, what's the next thing I'm the most passionate about? I'm very, very passionate about the law and policy. And the University of Tennessee has a great law school. So I thought, well, let me go work part-time in a law firm while I finish up these journalism studies and see what I think about law life, because I've kind of got a toe in the door here at UT. If I want to go to their law school, I could probably get myself into it. And I went and worked at a firm, found out I did not enjoy firm life, but in God's providence, one day when I'm down at the courthouse, I run into an Army recruiter, Staff Sergeant Lusk. I'll never forget the man. And we were riding the elevator up together. I'm there to file some paperwork for the firm. He's there to run criminal background checks on the latest batch of recruits. And I spotted him, someone in a military dress uniform. And of course, that's impressive to me as a civilian. And I'm asking him questions about Army life. And hey, we've just won in Iraq a few months ago. You guys are hard charging. You're awesome. And he spots in me someone who doesn't have a criminal record and would probably turn into a recruit. And 7 months later, I raised my right hand. I shipped off to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and I began basic training to work in military public affairs. And the reason was I thought, well, this is a great way for me to build up my experience in the public affairs realm, to build up my portfolio in public affairs, and I'll get to serve my country. This will be a way to build my experience in a virtuous way, and a way that will open my eyes to so much that I would never otherwise see. I expected to do 1 4-year term, and I ended up doing 20 and retired out of the Army just 2 years ago, a little bit earlier than planned, and we can get into that later here in the next little bit. But what an adventure it was. I was grateful to do it, and I'm grateful to be on the other side of it.
Actually, I do want to dig in now to why you left the Army early. So do you want to kind of give us a little more info there?
Yeah, totally. I learned very early on that military public affairs, we have what we say it does, and then we have what it actually does. And this is something that I explored in my dissertation at Kansas State University, was the space between the actual policy and the institutional norms. And I found over the course of my career, the difference between is wide enough you can drive a battleship through them. But early on, I realized, public affairs, the military, we say we are there to help keep the military transparent. But I found that really the purpose of it is to help commanders to look as good as they possibly can and to run a public relations interference whenever you need to. Now, with that said, there are a lot of really good public affairs folks who do great work and do work really hard to live up to the Department of War's principles of information. But there are a lot of people who truly believe that the point of their jobs is to cover commanders' butts and to make sure that no news that could reflect badly on the military gets out there. And that was something I learned really from my very first deployment to Kuwait that bothered me tremendously. But I still held hope, like this can be a good career field and there are still good people in it. And there's still a lot I can learn from it. So I at least made the promise to myself, I may never be able to be as open in answering a question as I think ethically I should be, but I will never lie. I will never deliberately obfuscate. I will never deliberately try to worm my way around a legitimate question. If it's one that I just can't answer, I'll be honest about it. I remember, case in point, I'll tell you one. I'm sure you guys have heard of Bo Bergdahl. The U.S. Army soldier who was a prisoner of war in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And we all know the story is that he walked away from his base. He deserted his unit. I ended up later on in my career being the public affairs officer for the brigade that he abandoned, the 4th Brigade of the 25th Infantry Division. Had a great 3 years there. But I learned early on, you just don't talk about Bo Bergdahl. No matter what, you don't talk about Bo Bergdahl. We pretend this thing never happened and we let the Pentagon deal with it.
Sorry, give the listeners a little context. Can you sort of remind us or give us the story on what was happening in the public versus what was happening behind the scenes?
Yeah, absolutely. So he walked away from his base while we were in Afghanistan. For whatever reason, he's done a whole podcast series of interviews talking about his reasonings for it. And he was captured by the Taliban, and he was held prisoner for several years in conditions that are unimaginable. But the military allowed a rumor to get out that he had just fallen behind on a patrol and had been captured that way. And so you had patriotic Americans literally like putting up billboards and every year remembering Bo Bergdahl, this poor soldier who simply fell behind on a patrol, and we don't want to leave our comrades behind, and we need to never forget Bo. And this is righteous. This is good stuff that they're doing. They don't know the truth that this guy walked away from his base, and the Pentagon allowed that narrative to continue playing out. And so when the Obama administration worked out a deal to bring him home, and they traded some very, very high value guys for him. I remember Susan Rice talking about, she was the White House, I believe the National Security Advisor, if I recall correctly. And she was bragging about how we brought this hero home and we brought this warrior home. Well, all the soldiers who had served with him knew the truth, but they had been gagged. Everything about his disappearance, about his abandonment had been classified so that no one could talk about it. And the members of his unit were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements. So you had the reality that he had walked away from his base, but we didn't want to talk about that. So we classified it, and we allowed this narrative, on the other hand, to come out. Oh, he merely fell behind on a patrol. And so these soldiers who knew him, when the President Obama had this Rose Garden ceremony and was hailing Bo Bergdahl as a hero, the soldiers who had served with him finally had enough and said, we don't care if there are repercussions. We're going to break these non-disclosure agreements. And they came out and began speaking out about what had really happened. And the country was shocked. I mean, it turned out that we actually lost soldiers trying to go find him. And the families of those soldiers who died trying to find him had not known that. They learned that in the news all these years later. And here I was as a public affairs officer. I knew the truth because people in the unit had told me the truth. I had read the classified report, but because it was classified, I was not allowed to talk about it. Of course, it's all since been declassified. The Army was really kind of shamed into doing the right thing after the men in his unit came out, and they were forced to declassify it all and to court-martial him. But it just was so, it was such a jading experience because, again, what would it have hurt to tell the truth? What did we gain from allowing a false narrative to get out there? If we would have said all along, you know what, the soldier made a terrible decision and he's captured and we're still going to do everything we can to bring this American home, what would that have hurt? But instead, you let this false narrative build and go on and on and on. And then when the truth comes out, well, now people wonder, can they trust you? Can they believe you? And so that's an area that I really do a lot of work in, is on military trust, because if you don't have a trusted military, how do you recruit? How do you use it? Look at the collapse in trust in the Army in the Vietnam era and what that did, not only to the institution, but the nation. And we are at a point right now where historically the public trust in the military is not much above where it was in Vietnam. And so that was one of my frustrations as a public affairs officer, was to say we should be the gatekeepers of trust by being honest. Our regulations tell us to do it. Our ethos tells us to do it. Our oath tells us to do it. Let's just do it. And so that leads into 2020, which is when the world absolutely lost its mind. And in the intervening years, there was a lot of frustration on my part, and there were a lot of issues that I could not speak. I was not clear to speak openly to that I wanted to. But again, I was able to really hold at least what I felt was an acceptable ethical paradigm. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to obfuscate. And if I have to redirect people, I will redirect them honestly. And going back to Bergdahl, I'll never forget one day in Alaska. It was after he had been brought back to the States. There was a reporter walking with me on the base, and she asked me, she said, "Chase, I'm reading all this stuff about Bergdahl, and families are really upset, and I'm trying to make sense of it." And this is before they declassified the report on him. So I was still not clear to talk to her and tell her what was the full truth was. But I was like, I have two choices here. Is it most PAOs are just going to lie and say, "Oh, don't believe what you're reading out there, blah, blah, blah," or they're just not going to talk, period. And I looked at her and said, if I was hearing what these family members are hearing right now, I would be incredibly upset. And they have every right to feel what they are feeling right now and every right to say what they're saying right now. Again, I couldn't come out and say everything I wanted to say. It was still classified. But I was determined I'm not going to lie. And so the rest of my career, I held that line. And then 2020 hit, and that's when we had the whole so-called vaccination mandate. And I'm looking around and I'm watching generals who had no medical training suddenly pulling a pure propaganda move, telling us that masks and shots save lives. I wish I had a copy of it here. You guys have all seen the Uncle Sam poster, I'm sure, of,
Mm-hmm.
We want you to enlist, the World War II poster. Fort Leavenworth, they redid it, and it was Uncle Sam. I want you to wear a mask. Masks and vaccinations save lives. And as a communicator, I work in communication. And the first rule of communication is when you have to tell someone something over and over and over and over and over again, you're in the midst of a propaganda campaign.
Yeah.
Right? I don't have to tell you men over and over and over again that you're men, or that one of you is wearing a hat, right? You know this. It's self-evident. It's true. When they have to tell over and over and over again that transgenderism enhances our readiness and enhances our combat effectiveness, when you have to say it over and over and over and over again, you're not in a play for truth. You're in a propaganda play. And I saw this happening all around me. It was Orwellian. It was like I was in the midst of 1984. And 2020 was my breaking point, because I realized, look, there was a lot we didn't know early on about COVID. I understand early on why some people kind of went excessive on certain precautions. But when you're 2 years in and you still have general officers on this train of shots and masks save lives, shots and masks save lives, I realized I can't speak for this institution anymore because I'm watching good Americans, people who have sacrificed, families who have sacrificed, being treated like lepers, being looked down upon. I'm hearing officers say things like, hey, if your family members don't have a shot, maybe they shouldn't be allowed on base. There was this one exercise I went to on Fort Riley in Kansas where the commanding general put out a policy and said, if you don't have your shot, you're restricted to going just from your hotel room to the training location. You can't use any of the base facilities, including the commissary, which is where you buy food. And I thought there were some bases. This did not happen on Fort Leavenworth. There were some bases. I think Fort Bragg was one of them where certain units required members to actually put armbands on if they weren't vaccinated.
It's a little too on the nose.
Yeah,
a little too on the nose.
Familiar.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Fort Leavenworth, when the shot was allegedly voluntary before it was mandatory, if you didn't have it, you were required to wear a mask. If you did have it, you weren't required to wear a mask. What's the purpose of that? Marking, right? I mean,
Yes,
we've read
of
this
course.
book before. And so 2020 was my breaking point of realizing, gosh, the Army has been good to me. It's been hard on me at times. It's not, there's been a lot of sacrifice, but I always believed in the goodness of the institution. And in 2020, I saw the institution run off a cliff, it pedal to the metal as fast and as hard as it could. And what's really ironic is 2020 was the year of the Army's People First strategy under Chief of Staff General McConville. And that's the year that they started literally terrorizing people if they weren't going along with the narrative. And that was the year that I decided I'm hitting my 20 and I'm going to move on. And the year that I left, I was selected for a promotion to lieutenant colonel. I had a sequence number, which that means they've already selected me and they've got a number. And once they reach it, they will promote me. So all I had to do was just wait a few months and my number would hit. But my family and I, we talked it over, we prayed it over, and we decided, I'm firmly convinced that I can do more good for the nation as a civilian than I ever would be able to do in uniform. And so we walked away with our heads held high, and we've been pushing for it ever since.
Well, one of the things you mentioned there was that it was kind of feeling all Orwellian, and I actually pulled a really good quote of his from the book Homage to Catalonia, which was kind of his memoirs of fighting in the Spanish Civil War back in the late 1930s. And this was a very eye-opening point for him, but it also was for me when I was first reading this, because you get this understanding that these public narratives we're getting are almost always a function of power, not transparency and truth. They're meant there to push a certain narrative in order to make people look good, as you were saying, or to cover for certain people. But in that book, he writes, early in life, I have noticed that no event is ever correctly reported in a newspaper. But in Spain, for the first time, I saw newspaper reports which did not bear any relation to the facts, not even the relationship which is implied in an ordinary lie. I saw great battles reported where there had been no fighting, in complete silence where hundreds of men had been killed. I saw troops who had fought bravely denounced as cowards and traitors, and others who had never seen a shot fired hailed as heroes of imaginary victories. And I saw newspapers in London retailing these lies, and eager intellectuals building emotional superstructures over events that never happened. I saw, in fact, history being written not in terms of what had happened, but of what ought to have happened according to various party lines. So my question there off of the back of that would be, how much of that messaging do you think is a function of transparency, and how much of it is just pure propaganda for party lines, as he's saying? Is it 80-20, 50-50? What's your thoughts on that?
A lot of it goes down to where you're at in terms of time and which campaign you're in. So, for example, when I was in Afghanistan, I was at the brigade level, and our messaging that I ran, and obviously I believe that we did a good job. We worked really hard. Our messaging there was focused on what are we doing within this province that we have been given to try to make it more secure. And we were working hard on that. Might I add, during the same time that President Obama had already announced his forced withdrawal. So that automatically did make it a little more complicated, because how do we say that we're here and we're committed when we're automatically being told, yeah, you're going to have to send automatically so much of your formation back because this is what DC wants. And of course, civilian leadership gets to make the ultimate call, but that did complicate matters. There were some units where PAOs worked really hard to be accurate, but I'll tell you, the public affairs guidance we received automatically put us at a disadvantage. And let me explain what public affairs guidance is. We call it PAG for short in the military, and it starts all the way up at the top at the Pentagon level, and works its way down through the services and through all the combatant commands, and then down to those of us who are working at the division or brigade kind of tactical level. And public affairs guidance is basically a long document. It's a military document. We call it Annex J of the Military Operations Order. And it talks about, here are the basic themes and the key messaging and the things that we want to convey, and the things that we hope that by saying we will be able to help the battlefield commander, whether by influencing publics in the places that we're operating to be more cooperative, and keeping the American public informed so we have support for the work that we're doing. And we were automatically kind of put on our heels on that, because the public affairs guidance for Afghanistan was very clear. It said, among other things, GAROA, standing for Government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, GAROA is in the lead for all combat operations. GAROA is completely self-sufficient and capable of providing security and stability for the Afghan people. And it was just one point after another of Afghans are in charge, and we are merely here as a supporting, assisting force. And you're looking around, and we're paying these people, we're equipping these people, we're dragging the Afghan units, the ANA, Afghan National Army units, out of their barracks to go on patrols. I mean, this is very clearly an American-led effort. And so I just refused in any of the stories that I wrote to put those BS narratives in. I mean, that's what I was supposed to do. I refused. The closest they could get me was I would put in concert with coalition forces, because it was technically a NATO campaign, even though I can tell you where I was at Bob Salerno, it was all Americans. But I would meet them kind of in the middle. Coalition forces, because we are part of the coalition. But I remember this one particular event. It was at night, and our aviation assault helicopters, they flew at night most of the time to go whack targets. And there was this one evening, they found a group of insurgents walking along a road, heavily armed men. They were very easily to identify as enemy forces. And the aviation task force did what needed to be done and killed those targets. I was sleeping when this happened. I worked during, pretty much like an 8 a.m. to like 9 p.m. shift, and then would have a little bit of time to work out and sleep and start again the next day. And so I walk in my office. I'm in the brigade headquarters building there in Afghanistan. I haven't even got the key in the door to open it yet. I can hear my phone ringing. And so I go answer the phone, and it's my higher division PAO back at Bagram saying, hey, this big thing happened last night. We need you to get a story to us about it so we can push it out. It was a big event. The commanding general here is really excited about it. And I was like, oh, cool your heels, sir. I'm just walking in. Let me go see what happened. I go into the operations center. I ask them about the operation, and they say, yeah, it's a nothing burger chase. The aviators last night did what they do routinely. They flew, they spotted bad guys, they killed bad guys. And I was like, okay. So I call the division, say, hey guys, this is a nothing burger. There's no story to be written here. And they're like, oh no, there's a story here. There's a story here. We got to have it. Like, fine. So I write the story. And again, I do, coalition forces, identified, targets, engaged them. I did the best I could to make it readable. There really wasn't much to work with, and I sent it up. And anytime they took something from us before they ran it, they would make tweaks on it and just send it back to us so we can make sure we were satisfied with the edits. And when it came back to me, it was totally rewritten. Afghan National Army forces went on this mission last night, and they were leading, and they found these people, and they neutralized them, and blah, 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 blah. Complete work of fiction. And I was livid for a few reasons. One, I knew it to be untrue. But any intelligent person would know it to be untrue as well. Afghan National Army, they don't work at night. They were a daytime force. They also did not have Apache longbow assault helicopters. That was an American asset. So I don't know how Afghans were whacking targets that for the equipment they didn't have. It was so clearly a propaganda move. I was a captain at the time. The division PAO was a lieutenant colonel. As I recall, in my 20-year military career, I think it's the only time I ever yelled at a higher ranking officer because I was just so livid. I thought, how dare you? How dare you take this work that I have given you that I didn't want to do and make it into pure propaganda? And I read him the riot act over the phone and said, sir, this is bullcrap. I don't know what your staff up there is doing. This is a complete work of fiction. This is a lie. This isn't what we're here to do. And he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Let me look into it. And he looked into it. And the end of the story is that story did not run. So there are examples like that where clearly Higher had aims that they wanted to put out these stories about how, look at the great thing the Afghans are doing. And the truth of the matter was, it was things that the Americans were doing because the Afghans weren't. And so going back to your question, like how much of what we hear about the battlefield is propaganda? And it's hard to put a percentage on it. Is it 20%? Is it 30%? Is it 50%? It always depends, but I can tell you it is never zero.
Right. So you're one of the good guys, and I can appreciate that. But it sounds like there are people that are willing to sort of toe the line or do what they're told or sort of fulfill the propaganda needs of the military. So we're regular citizens, regular-ish. So how would we be able to identify what is and what isn't propaganda? Like, what kind of tools can you give us and can you give our listeners to understand? Because it's my opinion that we're pretty well under a propaganda attack at all times these days. And I think that they use the military as one of their foundational pieces. So what sort of guidance or information can you give us that would help us sort of identify when we are being propagandized? And obviously, repeat tactic is pretty clear, but just anything else that would help people or give them a set of tools to be able to navigate these waters a little better?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I would say the biggest thing that I encourage people to watch for are what I call value terms being overused. And what's a value term? It's a term that is designed to elicit an emotional kind of moral connection with us. So like who doesn't want what's on behalf of the public good, right? Who doesn't want what's on behalf of fighting readiness? Who doesn't want what's on behalf of insert any other keyword you want that is designed to emotionally manipulate you to wanting to align with it or to align with whatever cause they put with it because you feel like that's a moral thing. If you hear something being repeated over and over again and tied to a value term, chances are you're being propagandized. So, for example, Afghanistan, it was always, well, Afghans are in the lead. Afghans are self-sufficient. Afghans are leading the charge in readiness for the stability and security of Afghanistan. When you're hearing these kind of terms come up over and over and over and over again, you're hearing deliberate messaging. And messaging in and of itself is not evil. Messaging is neutral. There are ways to use messaging in very positive ways, and that's what I try to work in. But when you hear something repeated over and over and over again, and it's challenging to believe when you look around at just the most basic realities, you're probably being propagandized. If you're hearing a value term over and over again, like we heard during the whole debate over should we put women in frontline combat arms? Should we bring people who suffer gender dysphoria into the military? There was never an actual statistical justification made. It was always, well, this increases our readiness. This increases our lethality. And you heard those terms over and over and over and over again. Why? Because who wants to argue against military readiness? Who wants to argue against military lethality? Who wants to argue against these things that we assign to the military as requirements? Well, you don't want to argue against those. So if I can tie this idea to that term that is deliberately used for manipulation, I'm probably being played.
Yeah, that perfectly kind of goes in line with something that I've been trying to unravel in my own head. You know, Aristotle said there was kind of three different modes to argumentation, which is there's logos, which is relying on logic and rationale. And then you've got ethos, which would be relying on authority and credentials. And then you've got pathos, which is relying on emotional arguments. And it seems to me like, as you're describing, that yeah, propaganda just fits into always those last two only, which is emotional statements backed up by claims of authority. And there's almost never any logical or rational argument being relayed through. But then, so how do you see that this is affecting, say, general society, these highly emotional frameworks for narratives? And because to me, it seems like almost all propaganda, no matter where it's coming from, whether it's foreign interference in media, whether it's social media bots, or whether it's public messaging from the military and such like that, it seems to me that this constant being propagandized from every different angle is starting to kind of warp citizens' minds in a way, really starting to do some damage, because the battlefield seems to be mental now. Are you seeing that play out? How worried or concerned are you on that front?
I'm deeply concerned about it, and I know I'm seeing it play out in real time, and I'm sure you guys are as well. We're right now just a few days removed from the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I don't know what you guys are seeing up north of the border. I'm sure it's probably very similar to what we're seeing down here, is the number of people who celebrated this, including in the military. Yeah, celebrated political assassination. I've never seen anything like it in my life. And I guarantee you, most of those people would sit at a Thanksgiving table with you, and you would never guess that they would say to you, I disagree with you, and therefore it would be okay if someone shot you in the neck. I don't think most of them would say that. But there has been this propagandized movement to paint Charlie Kirk as a racist or a homophobe or a misogynist, or add in whatever other word ending in phobe or ist or any other word of insult you can think of. And people have been trained to think, because I can assign these words to him, and these are manipulative words, because you don't want to be called a phobe. You don't want to be called an ist. We equate that with negative. We equate that with, immorality. You don't want that. And so if you can assign those labels to someone, now I can justify violence against you. And I got to tell you, I have looked around at some people who I never would have thought endorsing this. And it makes me wonder, okay, if you're saying it's okay for that person to take a bullet in the neck publicly, execution style, because you don't like what that person says, well, how do you feel about me? Right? And to a wider military context, if you see your commander or your squad leader or anyone else who is there next to you in the trenches, if you see them saying these things, how do you trust them? Right? And this is a play that's been made, and I'm absolutely convinced this is 5th-gen warfare. Hostile nations don't want to engage us in tank-on-tank battle. They would be insane to try to take on the United States in that way. How do you collapse an empire that is more powerful than you? You have to do it from within. It's the Trojan horse at play. You bring that idea in, and the idea permeates society, divides the people from each other. We separate them from the values of their ancestors. We break their knowledge of history. We break their knowledge of civics. We break any connection they have to the past and what G.K. Chesterton called democracy of the dead. We break them from all of that. And then we can manipulate them into thinking whatever we want them to think by repeatedly pounding the messages, whether it be through traditional and non-traditional and social media. And I've just, again, we saw in 2020 where all of a sudden there were people making arguments that if you didn't get a shot, you're a bad person and might be deserving of being put out of society, to now here in 2025, where if you challenge a progressive idea, then maybe you deserve a bullet in the neck. So yeah, this thing is happening, and it's dangerous, and we have to wrap our minds around it. I'm a big fan of freedom of information and freedom of information flow, but I also look around it and I'm full on board with the argument that like TikTok has no place in the West.
Yeah, for me, we see things very similarly to what you were just saying. We've identified, like, I've had friends, family that are even sort of condoning what's happened to Kirk. And for me, it's just insane that you're identifying these people going, wow, you're just completely brainwashed at this point. First of all, they have no idea what Charlie Kirk actually stood for. Second of all, the justification of it, or they're just sort of soft pedaling murder. We're in a very weird place. And it's kind of what Yuri Bezmenov was saying in the 80s. Like, it's just that mental warfare seems to have permeated society, like, significantly. How do you think we get out of it, though? Because, there's this thought process where logic is up here, then emotion's down here. Once you're in this emotional space, it's very hard to get people to use logic to work their way out of this problem. So how do we actually get out? Because I do think, this is Liam's statistic. I'm inclined to agree that like 20-30% of society is so deeply buried in this political ideology. I don't know how we break them out of it. I don't know what we do.
Education is such an important thing. And I'm sure we probably have some similarities between what's going on up there and what's going on down here. The public education system, the dirty little secret that no one wants to talk about is the fact that it is designed to do exactly what it's doing. It's designed to produce the kind of citizens that we are seeing right now. John Dewey is considered the founder, kind of the father of the American governmental education system. And he openly said, again, this is not me with tinfoil on my head at 2 a.m. listening to AM radio. This is the words of John Dewey himself, who worked at the Teachers College there at Columbia University. He said, the purpose of the public school system is to separate children from the prejudices of their parents. And prejudice was his word. I would say values of their parents.
Agreed.
For the purpose of getting them to be more malleable, and so that we can make them into the kind of citizens that we want them to be. And we're looking around and we're seeing people who don't know how to use logic, who don't have an understanding of classical arts, who have no concept of history. I mean, how many man on the street interviews have we seen where people have no idea who their mayor is, or who their congressperson is, or what date the Declaration of Independence was signed? And I'm sure you guys have the same thing up there as well, right?
Yes.
That's by design. It's deliberate. If you can break people from any ontological knowledge of who they are and where they fit in the historical pattern, they're lost and they're easy to turn around. And so for me, the first answer obviously as a Christian is a lot of prayer, a lot of repentance. And we have to get education under control. I'm a big fan of the return to classical education. We're kind of having a renaissance of that down here in the States. A lot of new classical schools are starting to open, some of them private Christian, some of them in the public school system. Florida is really leading the way on this and bringing classical education back into the governmental education systems. You have to do that. The current generations we have, they have what they have, and we're going to have to do everything we can to battle with them in the space of ideas and get them to understand truth. Some can be swayed, some can't. We're just going to have to do the best we can and hope that we can outvote them. All right. But future generations, we have to actually care about what we're teaching them. With that said, I have a lot of hope right now with what I'm seeing in Generation Z. I think the Generation Zers are tired of being lied to. I think they can spot a lie a mile away. I think they know what propaganda looks like because they have lived their entire life in a bowl of propaganda. And I think there's a healthy desire on their part for truth. And so it's not to say that every young person is on the straight and narrow, but I'm seeing some very encouraging signs that we're kind of on that cusp of hard times creating good men again in the years to come.
Before we move on to the next topic, this episode is brought to you by The Tallowed Truth. Would you ever eat your skincare? No? Then why put it on your skin, your body's biggest organ? Most skincare products are loaded with chemicals that absorb straight into your body. That hydrating cream might as well come with a hazard warning. Your skin needs real nourishment, not lab experiments. That's why I use F-Bomb from The Tallowed Truth, made from grass-fed, grass-finished tallow. It's also hormone-free, antibiotic-free, steroid-free, GMO-free, and even vaccine-free. Nothing artificial, nothing toxic, just results. I've been using F-Bomb from The Tallowed Truth for almost a year now, and honestly, I'm never going back. My skin feels hydrated, my fine lines are reducing, and I just look better. Plus, I'm already 40. This shit's not going to get any easier for me. But what makes The Tallowed Truth even better is that they're a freedom-first brand that supports Blendr News and everything we stand for. They even offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you've got nothing to lose. So, go to thetallowedtruth.com/blender and use code BLENDR, BLENDR, for 15% off. This includes 15% off already discounted bundles too, so you can save as much as 40%. That's thetallow.truth.com/blender, code BLENDR at checkout for 15% off.
Yeah, and so kind of building on that, because I definitely have long viewed education as one of the main perpetrators of kind of this ideological capture. Obviously, it makes complete sense, right? You get the kids for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's pretty easy to instill statist values into them and detach them from their more grassroots community. But I also think that this has been the large purpose across many institutions of DEI programs, because in the affirmative action stuff is, no matter what totalitarian regime it was, whether it was the Nazis, whether it was the Soviet Union, this is a function of these types of societies that do fall into totalitarianism, where positions of authority, so like kind of that 1% of society, they end up getting the loyalists, the ideological loyalists, into those positions. And as long as there is 6 to 12% of sympathizers within the institutions, then it actually kind of works as a pressure cooker from top down authority control and also fervor from below to make the herd of that like 90% of people who just want to go about their day and don't really care about all this kind of stuff. They get essentially moved along, but with the ideological architects. And this is why I do think that going against those DEI programs is a necessary move in both, whether it be American society or Canadian society. But how effective do you think that those programs were in the States? Because we've seen Trump start to kind of pull against the DEI stuff. Obviously, some programs have just been renamed and different people take on different titles. But I was looking at the budgets for the DoD, the Department of Defense, over the last few years, and they were significantly ramping it up. So in 2022, they spent $68 million on DEI. In 2023, they spent $86.5 million, and their 2024 initial request was for $114.7 million. So you're getting close to a 50% increase in DEI budgets over a span of 2 years. And so, like, how much damage do you think that did to those institutions and essentially getting those ideological loyalists into positions of power?
It was tremendously damaging. Just think back to 2022. We had the worst recruiting crisis in the history of the all-volunteer force, which started in 1973. I haven't studied this in terms of longevity of years, but I've looked at the data starting from 2018 and going up through 2024. We're still waiting to see what the data on 2025 looks like. And you just saw in 2022 a nosedive. I mean, it was the steepest decline in trust of the military since the Vietnam era. Think about that. That is the fruit of the DEI industrial complex fully taking root in the military. We got to the point where we knew people were being promoted and brought in based on their intersectionality. And by intersectionality, I mean, I'm talking about, this was a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and it means if it's neo-Marxist. So in Marxism, you have an oppressed class and you have oppressors, and we are all merely agents of economic exchange, and we are either oppressors or oppressees. And the goal of Marxism is to have the oppressees overcome the oppressors, and really just to reverse it and make the oppressees the oppressors and the oppressors the oppressees. And they never really answer what you do after that. It seems like they just really reverse the problem. But intersectionality says, okay, well, everyone is in some way oppressed unless you're a white male. If you're a white male, you cannot be oppressed. But if you're a woman, you get one mark of oppression. If you're a woman of color, you get another mark of oppression. If you're a woman of color who lives an alternative sexuality, you get another intersection, and you're stacking points in the competition to see who can be the most oppressed. And we saw that weave its way into the military. And again, this was put under these value terms of acceptance and inclusiveness. And who doesn't want the military to be inclusive and in terms of you feeling like you're truly a member of a team? Because teamwork is a key ethos of the military. So you bring in this word inclusive, and it's designed to appeal to that teamwork ethic of the military. And you say, well, don't you want people to feel included as a part of a team? Well, yes, I do want people to feel included as a part of the team. But I don't believe that these neo-Marxist doctrines is the way to get there. And so, yeah, I mean, we saw, you pointed out the amount of money. I mean, a ship could have been built for that amount of money that was put into DEI programs. And here's the impact that had in the force. It not only just wrecked the public's trust in the force, because the military traditionally since the Second World War has recruited from predominantly conservative areas. That's because that's where the most people who want to serve come from. You don't find a lot of surfers in San Diego or pretty boys in New York who want to join the Army. It's just the way it is. You find most of them in the South. And we had Army Secretary Christine Wormuth actually talk down about that and say, we want to get away from recruiting in the South. We want to get away from this multi-generational service, and we want to recruit in urban areas. Okay, well, that's not where you find the most people who want to serve. Why did she want to switch that up? Well, she wanted to bring about ideological transformation in the force, because that is a way that progressives want to bring ideological transformation on the rest of the nation. Because if you can say, hey, the military embraces this, therefore it's good, you can kind of drag the nation along. And President Obama, he was really good at that. So these programs, outside the force, they absolutely slaughtered public trust in the force, because people were saying, look, I don't want to join a military that hates me. And why would they? My son came to me when he was 17 and said he wanted to join. And I said, son, I love you and I'll support whatever you do. And I was still active duty at the time, keep in mind. And I said, but if you want to join, you have two options. You can join whatever component of the military you want when you turn 18. But if you're wanting me to sign an age waiver for you to join while you're 17, you can join the National Guard. Because at least in the National Guard, there is some semblance of local control. And I will sign off on that. I will not sign off on giving my son away to the federalized force right now. I do not trust it. I don't believe its leadership is good. I am in the process of getting out myself because of it. And he had observed what I'd gone through. He's like, Dad, I would never join the reserves or active component. You crazy? No, I want to go to the Guard. And so I signed his age waiver. But so many veterans have similar sentiments. And there's actual research data on that right now, most veterans do not recommend military service, because once you're in, you can't trust people. If your commander wants to punish you because you say men are men and women are women, and that is ontological truth. And I have walked that through that myself. Like, what does that do for trust if you feel like, well, I can't talk about these things that I believe are true because I might get punished about it? So what do? We train our military members to lie, and yet we expect honesty from them. I mean, it goes back to what C.S. Lewis said in The Abolition of Man about, we basically castrate the boys and expect them to be men, and it just doesn't work.
It sounds very much like the military in the U.S. has sort of been hijacked via gaslighting. Like, that's where it's currently at. It sounds like there's a pretty significant amount of progressive extremism in there. So do you see it turning around? I know Hegseth said some stuff today, and it seems like Trump is trying to move the needle in the right direction. But I kind of have this thought where, you can have, let's call it the right guy in charge, but it doesn't necessarily change the other institutions that may already be hijacked. So a good example is the public education system, like you said, or college universities, all this stuff. It's 10-1. You have 10 liberals or 10 Democrats to a Republican as a teacher. So even if you have a conservative or Republican leader, it's very, very difficult to make the change within the institutions. Where do you think the American military falls within that conversation?
The military has been ideologically captured. There's just absolutely no way around it. It's a sad truth. Now, I have a lot of confidence in Secretary Hegseth. I was actually at the Pentagon just a few days ago. I was in D.C. for some events, and I spent some time at the Pentagon and met with some folks. And I have a lot of confidence in the team that he has brought in with him. There are some really, really, really good people in top leadership positions in the Department of War right now, and I'm grateful for it. As a matter of fact, I sat in a very, very, very senior office like I said, just last week, and I got to pray with one of the principals. I mean, just something I never thought would happen in my life. It was just wonderful. But again, the Department of War is massive. I mean, it's the largest American institution. I think it's the largest institution worldwide, actually. And you can have all the right people at the top putting out all the right policies, but enforcement is required. And this has been one of the things that I have said about some of what Secretary Hegseth has done. And again, I'm a big fan. But one of my criticisms has been, you make these videos about, hey, I made this policy, and the policy is good. It's a solid policy. It's a needed policy, and I'm grateful for the policy. But the problem is, how do you enforce it? Like, making the policy is one thing. Enforcing it is another. And there are too many folks across the institution, even at the higher SES ranks that were holdovers from the Biden and Obama years, all the way down to, some of the lowest people at ground level who's come up in the last 10, 15 years where the military rewarded intersectionalism. It rewarded you and incentivized you to go along with the full DEI neo-Marxist doctrines. And so do you just overnight convert these people to the truth? Most of them are fully bought in. That's how they got to their positions right now, where they're at, because they bought into these doctrines. And you have to go about enforcing this change. And so one of my contentions all along has been that no matter who's going to become the Secretary of War, this is back before Hegseth was nominated, I said all along, whoever that person is, they have such a heavy lift that they need literally an army, like a division-sized, multiple thousand people coming in with them who agree with them, who believe with them, who are empowered to carry out and enforce their policy directives across the department. Absent that, you're going to be fighting a knife fight the whole way. Now, Secretary Hegseth did today have a meeting with most of the generals and admirals, and he laid out his vision, and he told them very clearly, very respectfully, might I add, look, this is the way ahead. I think all of you joined the military for this, and so I fully believe you're on board. But if you're not, that's okay. If you're not, the honorable thing to do is to go ahead and conclude your career. We will thank you for your service. We will send you away with honor, but this is the way. And I was glad to see him say that. I'm hoping now that that has been said, eyeball to eyeball with these guys, that they will enforce it. And I'm going to be one of the guys trying to keep an eye on that from the outside.
Well, yeah, and I've always seen this too as a generational battle, in a sense, where the conclusion of where we've got to today with all of the craziness has been decades upon decades in the making. We're just kind of seeing the catalyst to it now. And actually, I think one of that process is actually, it's a brilliant process by the Marxist strategists. And this goes back to like the 1930s, as well as the Popular Front strategy. And this has happened in education. This has happened in the military, not even just in America, but also in Canada. You've seen it across all Western nations' militaries, this kind of left-wing extremist ideology permeating throughout it. But what they'll do is, let's say you've got your typical political spectrum. You've got communists on the far left, then you've got progressives, then you've got liberals, then you've got, maybe libertarian types, just right of center, conservatives, and then on the far right, you've got fascists. Well, what the communists will do is they'll form a coalition with everybody that is not the furthest right. So let's say there's 6 of them. They'll form a coalition with the furthest left 5, and they'll push out the furthest right. And that might be legitimate white nationalists or far fascist type people. But then after they're gone, then they form another coalition with the remaining 4 and push out the 5th, which is at that point just kind of conservatives. And then they'll form a coalition with the 3 and push out the libertarians, and then the liberals, and then the progressives, until all that's left is the communists. But I do kind of, I don't know about you, maybe I was hoping you'd be able to give us a little bit more of an insight into this. Do you see this as the kind of, because we have gotten to this point where it's been extremely left-wing. It's pretty much only the communists and the progressive left in a lot of these institutions. But do you see this as the beginning of kind of that opening again? Or I don't know, what's your perspective on that?
That's a really good question. And that's a model I haven't given a lot of thought to it. And so I don't want to I don't want to try to think out on the fly here and sound too ignorant, but I'll say the military is a little bit different from most other institutions in that it is not ever meant to be democratic. It's meant to be a very top-down hierarchy. Orders are given and orders are executed, and the only way you push back is if you believe the order is unlawful. And in reality, the sad truth is no order is truly ever treated as unlawful, as we have seen time and time and time again, though it should be. And so at the end of the day, can it be turned? I'm always optimistic. I'm always hopeful. Think about the fact that the military held to a conservative ethos consistently throughout its entire history. And I want to be really, really clear and pause and foot stomp on this a little bit. For any listeners who are listening with kind of a critical ear on this, when I say conservative, I'm not saying, enthusiastically voting Republican and holding to what they would say is the right-wing ideologies. Here's what I'm saying. Samuel Huntington mentioned this in his masterwork, The Soldier and the State, in 1957. What does the military exist to do? It exists to defend, to protect, to preserve, to conserve, right? That's what conservatism is all about. It is preserving what we have, preserving the values that our nation was built upon, right? And militaries are inherently supposed to be conservative minded because you're trying to protect what you have. You're trying to protect the nation. And it held to that ethos through the majority of its history. It wasn't until the Obama administration went after it relentlessly over 8 years that it took nearly the full 8 years for them to finally begin to force the military to begin turning. Trump administration 1 comes in and kind of expected that the military was still adhering to a conservative mindset and that we've preserved the Constitution and the virtues of the nation. Well, they miscalculated, not realizing how far left Obama had pushed the military. Biden comes in, makes record gains on forcing it further left wing. And so now we have Trump 2.0. They have a knife fight, and it's going to require sustained effort every day of these 4 years. And God willing, we'll have another, at least through Republican in the White House after Trump, that will continue that. That will take years. But I'm ever hopeful it can be done because I watched how quickly the Obama administration turned it, and they turned it from, 2 centuries of history. So I am very optimistic that if one administration could turn the military from centuries of history, that another administration with enough time could turn it from a mere 15 years of bad history.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very hopeful of the same. I think that's the thing that kind of gives me hope with Canada, with places like the States, just in sort of turning over these institutions. And, it's funny, like you said, it's not really about being a Republican or being a Democrat. It's just like there's logic to this. There's a way that this system operates most efficiently and most effectively. And we seem to have lost sight of this, primarily for the purpose of ideology. Sometimes I sit and I wonder, and I try to figure out what the reasoning behind any of this is. Do you ever find yourself just, and I don't think there's an answer. I think it's just it's subjective. It's an opinion. But do you ever sit there and just kind of wonder, why are these people? Why? And in this particular conversation, I can say it this way: why did the Obama administration? Why did the Biden administration? Why are they pushing this? Why are they pushing this on Americans? Because objectively, this is not what's good for the people. So why do you think it's happening?
Yeah, I believe it's theological, and I know we probably think a little bit differently on this, but if you'll humor me for a moment, I'm going to make a case for it. In Christian theology, I believe that there's a God and that Jesus Christ is His Son and died on a cross and was raised to save us from our sins, and that He will come again and judge the living and the dead. Progressive ideology is itself its own theology. It's a theology that has different ends. Just a couple of days ago, former President Obama spoke about this very well. And again, I'm a huge critic of his, and I don't like what he says, but I'll give him credit. He defends his thesis well. And he said, there's a moral arc to the universe. And that's what progressivism is about. It's about trying to achieve an end. In Christian theology, we believe in what we call an eschatology, a doctrine of end times, where eventually, the Lord will redeem the world and sin will be no more, and we will get out of this post-Genesis 3 fall state that we're in right now. But we believe that God Himself will do that. progressive ideology, neo-Marxism, DEI, all of this is tied to its own eschatology. They share the viewpoint with us that things are broken, that things are not the way they should be. They have a different way of getting there, though. They believe that humanity can earn its way to perfection. And so they use, that's where the term progressive comes from, is that humanity will eventually progress across the moral arc and achieve our perfection on our own. President Obama the other day, in his comments, though, he took it a little bit step further. He said there is a progressive arc to the universe, but sometimes we have to pull on it to get there. And that's why they are so dogged in this. They're chasing their own eschatology, their own way of trying to get to a perfected state of end time in which everything will be fine. There'll be no more strife. There'll be no more war. There'll be no more fighting. If they can just kill off enough of us who think the way we do, and they will have their own perfect paradise of their own making. And it's a deeply theological commitment. I mean, bottom line is, whether or not you believe in God, there's a God-shaped hole in all of us, and we are all trying to find an answer, and we're all trying to find a way to perfection. We believe that God brings perfection. Progressives believe that humanity can achieve perfection if we keep working towards this progressive arc. And that's why they're so dogged on this. To them, this is deeply theological, and they take this responsibility to move the world in the progressive way with the same intensity and fervor that I take it to preserve the good in it to hand down to future generations.
Well, I just want to steelman your point a little further here, because this is something that, definitely opened my eyes to what it means to be a quote unquote progressive, is that they see that progress is what you were talking about earlier, when oppressed classes overthrow the oppressors. So that is a model of progress to them. That's them thinking that the moral arc is bending towards justice is the overthrow of oppression. But all of these ideas stem back to Karl Marx, and to understand his ideas, you have to understand the man. And there's a fantastic book by Paul Kangor called The Devil and Karl Marx, which is a biography on Marx. And because everybody thinks of him as an economist, but he really wasn't. He was really a theologian. His start in academia and intellectual spaces was actually as an anti-Christian. He was this is the thing about Marxists too. They're not just atheists in the sense that they don't believe in God, and therefore whatever, let other people, if they believe in that, that's fine, but we don't think anybody has to believe in it. They call themselves, and the Bolsheviks did this, the Maoists did this, they actually call themselves militant atheists. So we're not just disbelieving in God, we're actually engaging in war against God, which is kind of funny that you can think of from their perspective. If, okay, God doesn't exist, well, if he doesn't exist, then how are you fighting him, right? Like, how do you wage a war on something that doesn't exist? But their whole idea behind all of this kind of left-wing progressive thought stems out of, Marx and Rousseau, who both thought that our civilization, the world, our social structures corrupt man, and that's why we see all of these ills, and that's why we sin, quote unquote, or we engage in greed and lust and all of this kind of stuff. And therefore, if we strip away this civilization, if we take across all social structures and rip them down, then man will actually be retransformed into his proper social self and become this social, communist style creature as they think. And so to them, it's rip it all down, and then what will be left is this paradise where everyone is just shares with one another. And so to your point, and this is kind of how I started opening my own self up to kind of religious thought. I would say I'm not quite fully there yet, but I definitely am exploring it more and more, is that I realized that just kind of like a reverse engineering of their own philosophies. It's like, oh, if they're, waging a war against this thing. Is there any value to the thing that they're waging a war against? And I think that is actually why they attack the Christian ideal so much. I mean, we see it with churches burned across. You see it. They don't allow this thought into places like the military at all. If you at all adhere to Christian values, you're all of a sudden considered a white Christian nationalist in these institutions. But yeah, so to your point there, when it comes to Obama, when it comes to all of these leftist DEI programs and all of this kind of stuff, there is a very theological aspect to it where they are hoping to reshape man and actually change our fundamental nature by tearing down these quote unquote oppressive systems. So, that's kind of just a long-winded rant there to add on to you. But is there anything, before we get wrapping up, is there anything that you would like our audience to know in terms that we didn't already cover or that you think would be to their benefit?
Well, there is, and I'll try to remember to come to that in a moment. I want to tag on what you said there for just a moment. I think what you're getting at, Liam, is at the end of the day, progressive rhetoric betrays the fact that there is no such thing as a moral relativist. Mm-hmm. That we all hold to some form or some fashion of trying to believe what is right and what is wrong. And where progressivism falls apart, I mean, it's like the waves crashing upon the rocks of a bluff, and they're just scattered everywhere. Where it falls apart like that is if you don't have a central moral authority, then how do you decide what is good? If God does not exist and he did not say, thou shalt not steal, then who else is to say that it is wrong for me to steal from anyone? Or thou shalt not kill. All right. Well, if there's no moral authority and we're all just evolved creatures and it's all just survival of the fittest, then why would it be wrong to kill? Is that not just the continuation of survival of the fittest, one might argue? And it just... So I love that you went into that, because it just reminds me at the end of the day, there's this old military saying there are no atheists in foxholes. I mean, no one at the end of the day is truly a moral relativist. And so going to your question about what would I like to add, I would encourage people, keep in mind, I'm a veteran. I did 20 years in the military. I'm a patriot. I so desperately want to be a cheerleader for the armed forces. I mean, veterans are traditionally some of the biggest brand ambassadors, some of the biggest cheerleaders, and I want to be again. But we have to, as Americans and as Canadians, we have to be willing to question the wisdom of our generals. We have to be willing and able to question what is happening. Americans are look at lawmakers in the U.S. Whenever these generals go before the House or Senate Armed Services Committee, they show up in their dress uniforms and got all their I was here ribbons on, and the senators and congressmen, I mean, they just kind of give them a ceremonial wire brushing in front of the C-SPAN cameras and they send them off. There's no actual accountability because, well, it makes you an unpopular congressman to really take this highly decorated warrior to task. And we have kind of the same mindset in society that while on the one hand, the troops are kind of lesser citizens, but on the other hand, you can't question the military. Yeah, you should. You should question the military. It's like any institution. It has its strengths. It has its weaknesses. Our founding fathers were very wary of a standing army. You should look up what Adams and Franklin had to say about it. I mean, that a standing army under a strong executive can be absolutely as much an instrument of tyranny as liberty. And so it's right and appropriate for Americans, for Canadians to ask those tough questions and to be willing to hold generals accountable and to be willing to hold the military accountable to its purpose. It should not be an untouchable institution. It is not infallible. It is not perfect. It was not created with the hand of God. And so we shouldn't be afraid of questioning it. And as our ancestors warned, keeping a close eye on it to keep it in check.
All right. And where can our listeners, if they want to keep up to date with your work and everything that you're exposing, where can they find that information?
Well, I appreciate that. I have a website, chasespears.com, and that's where I try to keep all my work updated. You can also connect with me on any of the social channels I'm on, whether that be X, LinkedIn, Facebook, Substack, YouTube. I'm at all of those at Dr. Chase Spears. And I also host my own podcast called Finding Your Spine. And that's in partnership with a wonderful group here in the Kansas City region called the Herzog Foundation. And the purpose of that podcast is we have conversations with brave men and women who have been willing to walk through the fire of persecution and hold their values intact and not blink and come out on the other side. And so I love to tell their stories, and I learned tremendously from them. And so that's called Finding Your Spine. It's available anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's also on YouTube. And if all else fails, you can go to chasespears.com and click on the Finding Your Spine link at the top, and that'll take you to it as well. So I'd welcome folks to tune into that and be encouraged.
Amazing. Chase, thanks very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. That was a great chat.
It's been a joy. Thanks so much for having me, gents.
We'll catch you all next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye, everybody.